When you read accounts of the late 1970s Texas oil boom, there is this, I don't know, this almost cinematic quality to the sheer unbridled euphoria of it all.
Oh, absolutely. The frenzy.
Right. Suddenly, every single energy company out there was being pitched as this massive growth story. Capital was just pouring in, from institutional investors, retail investors, and valuation discipline just entirely vanished.
Yeah, the prevailing logic back then was pretty much if you were standing anywhere near an oil derrick, you were going to get rich.
Exactly. But we all know how that ended.
The inevitable crash. It's a textbook example of what happens when a powerful macro narrative just completely overshadows basic business fundamentals. I mean, billions in capital were raised, billions were burned, and when the dust finally settled,
Only a handful of truly durable companies survived.
right, only the strategically sound ones made it through the bust.
And, this whole setup feels exactly like the premise of an incredible piece of research we've been looking at today. It's a deep dive sourced from an April 2026 Substack article by Equity Decoded by Spirit, and it's titled, India's Solar Boom Has a Glut Problem Nobody Wants to Talk About.
It's a fascinating piece.
It really is, because the scale of what is happening in India right now is genuinely staggering. Just to set the scene for you listening at home, as of March 2026, India's total solar capacity crossed 150 gigawatts.
Which is massive.
Right. And to put that into perspective, back in 2014, that number was just 3 gigawatts.
Yeah, the acceleration curve here is really what's catching the global market's attention. I mean, in 2025 alone, India added a record 36.6 gigawatts of capacity.
Wow. In 1 year.
In 1 year. Non-fossil sources now make up more than 50% of the country's total installed power capacity. So, we are witnessing the real-time structural transformation of an entire nation's energy backbone.
But, and here is where we get back to that Texas oil analogy, when a sector gets this kind of overwhelming government policy support combined with an unstoppable macro narrative, the market kind of stops asking the right questions.
They absolutely do.
People stop asking, how does this specific business actually make money? And they just start asking, how big is the total addressable market? So our mission with this deep dive today is to shortcut your path to being really well informed on this sector. We want to separate the sustainable businesses from the ones that are just coasting on subsidies.
And just to be clear from the jump, my approach to this sector is purely analytical.
Right, we're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We are looking at the financial and operational mechanics completely objectively. We aren't endorsing or criticizing the politics behind the government policies driving this boom. In an infrastructure sector that is this capital heavy, the difference between a good narrative and a good business is entirely found in the underlying math.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the first major trap, the source points out, is treating the entire solar sector as one monolithic solar bucket.
Yeah, that's a massive analytical error.
Right. Think of it this way, for you listening. Treating all solar companies the same is like saying the factory manufacturing industrial ovens, the contractor building a commercial kitchen, and the head chef running the restaurant are all in the exact same business.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. I mean, they rely on each other to exist, but their financial realities, their margins, and their risks are completely different.
Yeah, breaking the value chain out of that single box is essential. So at the very top, you have the module manufacturing segment, your oven makers, to use your analogy.
The ones actually building the hardware.
Exactly. These are the companies fabricating the photovoltaic cells and assembling the panels. And this tier is incredibly capital intensive and heavily dependent on rapid technological cycles.
And India has been aggressively pushing this, right, with the PLI scheme.
Yes, the production-linked incentive scheme. It drew over 52,900 crore in investments and created around 44,400 jobs. So it's huge. You've got key players here like Were Energies and Premier Energies.
And Premier is doing something a bit different, aren't they?
They are. Premier Energies is particularly notable because they possess rare backward integration.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they don't just assemble the final module, they actually manufacture the underlying cells. And that insulates them from the brutal price swings of importing base components.
Ah, got it. Which naturally leads to the contractor building the kitchen. In the solar ecosystem, those are the EPCs.
Right, engineering, procurement, and construction. And the EPCs operate on a completely different model. They are fundamentally capital-light contractors.
Wait, so they don't hold the assets at all?
No, they don't hold the asset on their balance sheet. They design the solar farms, procure the equipment, and execute the construction. That's it. Their profitability hinges entirely on project execution.
So something goes wrong on site.
Then they're in trouble. If labor costs spike or, if there's a logistical delay in getting panels to the site, their incredibly thin margins can evaporate overnight.
Man, that's stressful. And finally, we get to the chef running the restaurant, the IPPs.
The independent power producers.
Yeah.
These are the asset-heavy engine of the entire boom.
The guys who actually own the farms.
Exactly. They own the completed solar farms and generate returns by selling the electricity to state discoms, the distribution companies, usually through 25-year power purchase agreements, or PPAs.
And we are talking about massive players here, right? Like Adani Green Energy.
Yes, Adani Green, which hit 19.3 gigawatts of operational capacity by late FY 2026, and NTPC Green Energy. The theoretical appeal of an IPP is predictable, utility-like revenue. You lock in a rate, the sun shines, and the cash flows for 2 decades.
Okay, have to push back on that perceived stability, though. Because when you look at a company like NTPC Green Energy aiming for a massive 60 gigawatts by 2032, or some other IPP blasting out a press release about a 10-gigawatt pipeline, I mean, when you have state backing and targets that astronomical, isn't that order book basically guaranteed future money?
What's fascinating here is that this assumption is precisely where so many investors completely miscalculate the risk.
Really? How so?
A pipeline is just a concept, right? It is fraught with severe, tangible execution hurdles. To turn a spreadsheet pipeline into a physical electricity generating plant, the very first thing you need is land.
And I'm guessing that's not easy.
Not at all. In India, aggregating thousands of acres for a utility-scale project can take 6 to 12 months because land ownership is often deeply fragmented across multiple generations, and often without digitized titles.
Oh, wow. So you're negotiating with hundreds of individual families just to clear the footprint for the panels?
Exactly. The pipeline can stall out before a single shovel even hits the dirt.
That's wild.
And if you do secure the land, then you hit the transmission bottleneck.
Getting the power to the grid.
Right. Building the high-voltage grid infrastructure to carry the power away from a remote solar farm often takes significantly longer than building the farm itself. A completed solar plant without grid connectivity is, well, it's just a very expensive glass sculpture.
A giant mirror in the desert.
Pretty much. Furthermore, the source makes a crucial distinction. Only commissioned capacity, meaning plants actually connected to the grid, generates real cash flow.
But what about those massive government targets, like the 500 gigawatts by 2030?
Those are aspirational. The realization of that demand depends heavily on the financial health of the state discoms, and the enforcement of renewable purchase obligations, which target around 43.33% by 2029-30.
Right.
Many of these distributors operate at steep losses. A 25-year PPA is only as solid as the counterparty's ability to actually pay the invoice every month.
Because unlike a traditional coal or gas plant where the utility is constantly managing the variable cost of fuel, a solar farm has almost zero fuel costs.
Zero fuel cost, exactly.
The entire economic reality of the business sits right at the beginning. You are putting all your chips on the table on day one with the upfront capex and the financing structure.
Which creates a treacherous financial squeeze.
Let's talk about that squeeze because the numbers here are kind of scary.
They are. Over the last decade, the per-unit tariff for solar power in India has plummeted from around 6 or 7 rupees down to under 2.5 rupees today.
Under 2.5, that's a massive drop.
It is. That hyper-competitive bidding is fantastic for the consumer, but it permanently compresses the margins for the developer. You are locked into that sub-2.5 rupee rate for 25 years.
And these IPPs are financing this growth with huge piles of debt.
Oh, absolutely. It's standard industry practice to use high-debt debt. Usually project-level borrowing covers 70 to 75% of the total construction cost.
That's a lot of leverage.
Very much so. And because those locked-in tariffs are so low, the cash buffer is incredibly thin. The critical metric to watch here is the DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio.
Okay. And what's a bad number there?
A ratio under 1.2x is a huge red flag. Got it.
If your ratio is 1.2, it means for every dollar of debt obligation, the plant only generates $1.20 in cash. That mere 20-cent margin of safety has to absorb everything.
Like a bad weather season or a late payment?
Exactly. A cloudier than average monsoon season, degrading panel efficiency, or a delayed payment from a struggling discom. And if the IGP is using floating rate debt, Even a modest interest rate hike can entirely destroy the equity returns.
Which we are already seeing play out, right?
Yeah, it's evidenced by Adani Green recently having to refinance construction loans with 19-year debt. That just highlights how long these razor-thin financial structures have to be perfectly managed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've talked about the margin squeeze for the developers, but upstream, there is this completely unglamorous, silent crisis unfolding.
Manufacturing glut.
Yes, a historic manufacturing glut. For you listening, India's module manufacturing capacity currently exceeds local demand by 200 to 250%.
It's an astronomical oversupply. I mean, we have these brand new state-of-the-art factories running at just 25% utilization.
And running a capital-intensive manufacturing facility at 25% capacity just destroys your returns. The domestic market simply cannot absorb the sheer volume of panels coming off the assembly lines.
Which obviously begs the question, why can't they just pivot and export the excess? Because for years, the United States was soaking up almost everything India could produce, right?
Right, the U.S. was the ultimate safety valve.
Oh,
They historically absorbed nearly 90% of India's module exports.
90%.
Yeah, but that door is completely shut now. The U.S. implemented new tariffs of up to 50% on Indian panels, and on top of that, there are proposed anti-dumping duties.
Just totally closing off the market.
Essentially, yes. The margins required to overcome those trade barriers just don't exist anymore. The CEO of Satvik Green Energy was quoted in the source material stating that the U.S. market is simply not worth the risk.
So let me synthesize this for you guys listening. It's like you took out a massive 20-year mortgage to build 5 new factories to make a highly specific product. On the day you cut the ribbon, you find out your biggest overseas buyer, the one who accounted for 90% of your sales, just completely blocked your number.
It's a perfect analogy.
And because everyone else in your country did the exact same thing, your domestic customers are suddenly demanding a 60% discount just to take the inventory off your hands.
It forces a brutal reckoning. Anyone who built their financial models assuming high-margin export revenue is now trapped.
So with panels severely oversupplied and developer margins squeezed to the absolute bone, the entire industry desperately needs a new buyer. A savior, really. Someone willing to pay a premium. And perfectly on cue, we have the artificial intelligence boom.
Yes, the power demands of the AI sector are completely reshaping global energy forecasts.
Because these massive data centers need so much electricity, right?
Unbelievable amounts. India's data center capacity is expected to jump from roughly 960 megawatts today to over 9 gigawatts by 2030.
That is a 10x increase.
And when you factor in the sheer compute intensity, these data centers could consume 40 to 45 terawatt hours of electricity annually by the end of the decade.
Okay, so wait. If we have a massive oversupply of solar panels sitting in warehouses and a fleet of hyperscale AI data centers absolutely desperate for massive amounts of power, why can't we just plug these hyperscalers directly into the solar farms and solve both problems at once?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the fatal flaw in that idea becomes pretty obvious. It's a fundamental physics problem.
Okay, physics. Walk me through it.
Solar energy generation only happens at midday. It peaks at noon and drops to absolute zero the second the sun sets.
Right.
An AI data center, however, requires 247 uninterrupted power with zero downtime. A microsecond voltage drop crashes the system and costs millions.
Which means shoving more midday solar into the grid doesn't actually help the data centers at all.
Precisely. And India is already suffering from severe grid curtailment.
Curtailment meaning they just have to throw the power away.
Basically, yes. The grid was built around steady baseload power. When massive amounts of solar flood the grid at noon, operators often have to physically disconnect the solar farms because the grid can't handle the oversupply.
Oh man, that's terrible.
In 2025 alone, India lost 2.3 terawatt hours of solar power to curtailment.
That is a lot of wasted energy.
And if you are an IPP operating on a 1.2x DSCR, every curtailed unit of energy is cash, just vanishing into thin air.
You cannot build a durable business model on throwing away your product at the exact moment you are producing the most of it.
Exactly. So if you can't control the sun, your only option is to catch the energy when it's shining and hold on to it.
You have to build massive batteries.
Yes. This is the true future of the sector. It's called Firm and Dispatchable Renewable Energy, or FDRE. You pair the solar farm with a battery energy storage system, a BES.
Okay, so a massive lithium-ion storage bank.
Right. You capture that volatile midday surge, store it in utility-scale battery banks, and dispatch it in a smooth, controlled flow through the night.
Giving the data centers the 247 power they need. But integrating grid-scale batteries has to fundamentally change the cost, right?
Oh, it requires an entirely different level of capitalization. India is projecting a jump from just zero point 0.7 gigawatt hours of storage in late 2025 to 346 gigawatt hours by 2033.
Wow.
Achieving that will require nearly 4.79 lakh crore in investment.
That is a staggering amount of money. Who in the listed ecosystem is actually positioned to capture this?
Well, the smartest players are already restructuring. ACME Solar Holdings is heavily highlighted in the source material as a first mover in FDRE. They commissioned a 143 megawatt solar and 481 megawatt hour storage project in Rajasthan.
Specifically to provide that round-the-clock power.
Exactly. And JSW Energy is another major entity aggressively pivoting into storage. But what's really interesting is that this brings traditional battery manufacturers into the mix.
Oh, like car batteries.
Yeah, traditional lead-acid battery makers like Exide and Amara Raja. They recognize the existential opportunity here and are pivoting hard to lithium-ion for grid storage. Amara Raja is even building a giga corridor.
A giga corridor.
Yeah, a comprehensive manufacturing hub for lithium cells.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this and trying to be a smart consumer of this financial information, you really have to look past those flashy pipeline announcements and government targets. Plain midday solar is just becoming a commoditized product with shrinking margins and severe curtailment risks.
That's the reality.
The real winners will be those with conservative leverage and a clear storage strategy. Solar plus BESS, who can provide round-the-clock green power.
This raises an important question, however, and it's something the source material leaves us with. We've spent this whole time talking about building these assets, but we haven't discussed what happens when they die.
A waste.
The looming waste crisis. Most big utility-scale solar parks built during the mid-2010s boom will reach their end of life between 2035 and 2040. Projections indicate that by 2047, India will produce over 11 million tons of solar panel waste.
11 million tons, and I'm guessing we don't have the infrastructure to recycle that.
Right now, there is almost zero recycling infrastructure in place. It's a slow-moving ESG liability.
Just waiting to happen.
Exactly. And it leaves you wondering how this quietly unfunded cleanup cost might eventually upend the balance sheets of these asset-heavy IPPs in the coming decade.
That is a heavy but crucial thought to end on. Definitely something for you to mull over the next time you see a headline about a massive new solar farm.